Hi, I'm Winston Wang, the founder of GNet, along with Danny, and I'll be talking about how we would connect GNet to the database and how we set about making this web page, and along with the features that we will use. Our basics is that we'll use the HTML skeleton, and this is the very basic, the core of a web page. And then along with that is the CSS stylization sheet. And so this allows us to decide the theme and the layout of the entire HTML skeleton, and allows us to also change it very quickly without actually altering the entire HTML code itself. And when we focus group this with 3 high school students, we found that what we really wanted was a bunch of dark, full colors, and then one very bold color that stood out above the rest, and it gave it this mature feel that was very different from a social media site per se. It just gave it a serious atmosphere, and the bold color really improved the organization of the overall structure. It allowed us to easily pinpoint which things we needed to do, which buttons we needed to click, what commands we needed to issue, without having to really think and deliberate about it. And we prototyped this with Adobe Dreamweaver, and it allowed us to see what was happening in the web page as we made changes, as we wrote code. And this just gave us another level of focus and consciousness while writing code. It gave us intent. That was really important when we were programming this. On top of that HTML skeleton, we have jQuery, which is a JavaScript library. It's one of the biggest. And so what it does is that it eliminates a lot of cross-browser incompatibilities. Say if someone wanted to use Safari while another one wanted to use Google Chrome or Internet Explorer, we wouldn't have a problem with that because jQuery covers us on that. We wouldn't have to write separate code for, say, Internet Explorer. We wouldn't have to worry about that. And jQuery is also compatible with CSS files and HTML. So we could just have another separate file that allowed us to focus on the execution of the dynamic aspect of the program without having to worry about changing the style or having to change the layout or the HTML skeleton itself. And jQuery is very powerful. It's easily expandable, it has tons of widgets, and it allows us to separate each and every task into very small bits that are much easier to solve and accomplish. And another part is that it serves as the link to the networking and to the database. And this is very, very critical to the functionality of the overall forum even, because without this we wouldn't be able to communicate with the database and exchange information. And this is just one example, the button widget, and when you mouse over something with this, it will change the color of the button, and it just gives another layer of interactivity, and it just shows how diverse and how much potential we have. We can make pull-down menus, we can make sliders for quantities, and it's really endless and scalable, so we have a lot of flexibility in terms of long-term use. So next, we have the database component of this, and so we decided to use a Microsoft Access server. It's a file-based server instead of a SQL server, and which is based on the client-server model. And we decided to do this because we don't need super heavy computing power from the server. We're not using triggers or transmitting protocol over these database connections, because all we really need is the information from the forum. We don't need to command multiple computers because they can do that with the protocol that they're given already and what they come with. We don't need to send that again using the database. And jQuery allows us to open and close these connections, and then it gives us flexibility in how long we want to make these connections open. Whether or not we want to open and close the connection just long enough to retrieve and edit and then transmit the data, or if we want to retrieve the data, close the connection, let you edit it, and then open the connection only once you're done editing it. And these very small distinctions are very important because a part of databases is that there's a lot of multi-user conflict, and that happens, multi-user collisions to be specific, that happens a lot when multiple people try to access the same record at the same time. And there's multiple ways of fixing this, but if it doesn't get fixed, it leads to delays, it leads to failures to transmit, and it just makes a lot of havoc. And this is especially important like at the end of sixth period when everyone's trying to rush to get their stuff done at the bell. So everyone's trying to upload their material to the forum or to like their personal spaces, but they can't because there's a bunch of user collisions. We don't want that happening, so that's why we want to have these processes in place to allow multi-user access. And this also gives us a lot of options because we can choose to use a RAID array to store the data, or we can actually have an established server, or we can virtualize the storage and have it over multiple hard drives in multiple different places. It gives us that flexibility for what we want to do and how Mr. Greenway wants to figure this out. And when we first conceived this database, we decided to split into a front end and a back end. The front end just deals with the user interface, the things that don't change from transmission to transmission. It's the protocol, it's the logic, it's the forms, it's the formatting, it's just the user interface, in other words. And this links to the access data file, which is the back end. That's the raw data that you want from the forum. It's the information that's always changing. And this cuts down on the data transmission by a lot, because you're not constantly transmitting all that user interface information. You're just sending the things that you need, and that's a lot. It's very resource efficient, and it reduces traffic, it saves time, and it's so much better. It's so much easier and so much more organized. And it's easily updated without compromising data as well, because once you download these, you can update them as easily as you want and then access the backend database. However, if you did not have that database split, if you wanted to update the user interface, you'd have to update the entire database, and that would it's much more inefficient, and it's much more like processor intensive. And then this database split also gives us security, because the front end actually serves as validation and like a security clearance for the back end. So it allows us to secure our data, especially like intellectual property. Say some kid comes up with a code everyone else wants it, and you don't want them to steal it. So the security helps a lot. And then there's also the backend component, which is the data file, which is the things that is always constantly changing, the stuff that actually needs to be backed up. And that's one of the most important parts, is that when you back up these things, you don't have to constantly back up that front end things, because that would just simply be redundant. It's unintuitive, it's clunky, and we obviously don't want to do that. And so that's why we decided to have a backend, because we can easily update that. And there's also greater availability, because you're not constantly transmitting that front end data, and it's reducing the size and duration of the transmissions. And we would achieve this by using Microsoft Access 2010 or 2007. 2007 is the free version, so that would be better, because free is better, unless you want the district to pay for it, which would be perfect. And so that's about all for the networking component. And now back to Danny, if he has any closing words.